there's no República de Negros. And now this is a point about documents, about sources, that the Spaniards divide, in administrative terms, they divide the colony into two, what they call republics, which if you translate it into the English word, it doesn't really help, it's kind of confusing, but anyway. Republics of Spaniards and republics of Indians. What that means in administrative terms is that municipal communities, towns or villages or cities have town councils. And Spaniards have their own town councils, the cabildos with their officers, and then Indians in Yucatan, Mayas have their own town councils, and these can be in the same place. Right? Mérida has a Spanish town council, and then it has a bunch of Maya ones as well. So geographically they can be right folds on top of each other, but there's no República de Negros. Now, in some cases in Mexico where there are maroon communities, they negotiate their way into getting República de Negro. But those are exceptions that prove the rule. And there's no República de Negro anywhere in Yucatan. The point is that those repúblicas or those cabildos have notaries who have to record everything that happens in the community. The Maya ones write it all down in Maya. The Spanish ones write in Spanish, and we have thousands of examples of these documents that are preserved in Yucatan and Mexico and Seville. But there's no Afro-Yucatecan cabildo with a notary writing down the business of Afro-Yucatecans. So their sources, their source material is totally scattered. And that is one fact that I think that helps explain how they have kind of become invisible to people, the few people who are, fascinated by Yucatecan history. Going through the archives, they're not collected in categories. You can't go through, you can't put in, Afro-Yucatecan or even, mulatto, Yucatan, and come up with a whole body of documents. You just get kind of bits and pieces. Fifthly, post-colonial migration into Yucatan. If you were to do very kind of superficial and unscientific field work and go wandering around in Yucatan and saying, can I see if there are people who look like they might not be quite just Spaniards and Mayas? Obviously not a very satisfying methodology, but yeah, you would find people and maybe talk to them, and they might have some understanding of their ancestry as being more than just Maya and Spanish. But the problem is that in the 19th century, particularly in the late 19th century and early 20th century, there was quite a lot of migration from Veracruz and that part of the Gulf Coast and from Cuba into Yucatan. And so when people in Yucatan are kind of confronted with this idea that there were a lot of slaves in Yucatan, and there were people of African descent all through the colonial period, and you can still see that their ancestors are here today, particularly say somewhere like Campeche, the response is, no, those folks are descended from migrants who came in from Veracruz and from Cuba. And in some cases, or many cases, they are. So that confuses the issue. Finally, the last point, I think, is to do with the legacy of slavery and prejudice against Africans and their descendants generally in Mexico, not just in Yucatan, but in the Mexican Republic, that has fed into a Mexican national narrative in which you have a glorious indigenous past, right? Mesoamerican civilization, one of the great civilizations in human history, collides with European civilization in the form of Spaniards, and out of that complex process comes the modern Mexican Republic. Right? It's a kind of a binary process of conflict and synthesis and so on. But the African component gets lost in that kind of traditional narrative. The African component does not play a major role, and that's a larger story, as I sort of hinted earlier, that I think is not just one that is applicable to Yucatan and to Mexico, but also to other Latin American countries as well. Work has been done recently on Argentina, for example. Who thinks of Argentina as being a country with an important Afro-Argentine past and a contribution to Argentine culture and so on? No, but it's there, and it's lots of scholarly work that's being done that's sort of very slowly filtering through into kind of national consciousness. Where does a project like this go? Very quickly, as a kind of a coda to my talk. As I said, I hope that other people will follow in the footsteps here and find out all the things I missed, and all the mistakes I made, and will kind of create more of an interest in the Afro-Yucatecan past. Where I'm going is following these guys. This is the Belizean national flag. Look at the image that you get of Belize here. Here's the tree that they're cutting, logwood, here's the symbols, here's the trip, and here are the two logwood. This is some sort of vaguely white guy and a sort of vaguely black guy seeming to work together in harmony. It's like a nice kind of image. It's like brothers working together, cutting down trees. At night you drink rum, and it's just like all very kind of romantic, right? That's really not the reality of Belizean history. The reality of Belizean history is something else, and it ties through African slavery in really fascinating ways into Yucatan. People who work on Yucatan have no interest in Belize, because Belize is English colony, so it's nothing to do with Yucatan history. Right? People who work on Belize, oh wait, there aren't any of those. Who works on Belize? No one works on Belize because if you're interested in the British Empire, well, Belize doesn't become a colony until like late in the 19th century. I'm interested in the 17th and 18th century, so no one's going to. Belize isn't even a colony. Why would you go? If you're interested in the Caribbean, it's like Jamaica and Barbados, and hey, you can get grants to go to Barbados to do research in the archives. There's actually good archives in Jamaica and in Barbados and some of the smaller islands. You want to study, the history of slavery in those British colonies and sugar and salt. There's like all kinds of great stuff. There's great historical archaeology. Where's the historical archaeologist? Who I met earlier. There's great historical archaeology to be done on those islands. Why are you going to go to Belize? Belize is just a really weird place. It's actually the weirdest place on the planet, as some of you know. So it has fallen into this kind of hole. And in the course of doing this project, I kept finding stuff about Belize, because the slaves in Yucatan, increasingly in the 18th century, where did they come from? They came from Belize. And by the late 18th century, most of the slaves in Yucatan had come up from Belize. They weren't coming through Campeche anymore. That slave trade has just kind of dried up. And I thought, how are they coming up? Well, Spaniards are going on raiding parties down into Belize, and they're capturing them and bringing them back up. Okay, well that sounds terrible for these guys. These guys are being captured. And I discovered that there's a real problem down here that the Afro-Belizeans are escaping and on their own accord are going up here. We go into Bacalar in the 1750s, right? And there's a case of a Spaniard who's trekked all the way down there on a trade mission. He gets into Bacalar, and there's no one around. It's like, where is everybody? It's like some guy manning the fortification. There's a Spanish guy who's drunk. No, there's no one around. And then he finds these 5 black guys who don't speak any Spanish. What are these guys doing here? These guys have been here for 5 weeks. What are they doing? Well, they came in from Belize. Why? Oh, they're escaped slaves. The Spaniard gets all worked up. He's like, it's Bacalar, what do you want? There's nothing going on down here. We don't care. They started working, so they get rounded up, taken up to Maryland, and they say, yeah, yes, we were slaves of the British in Belize, and we were all born in Jamaica. And they have a whole interesting story about, some of them tell stories about how they once upon a time were captured by Spaniards and they were slaves in Cuba, and then they escaped from that, and there's all this kind of opens up this whole interesting Caribbean world. And they say that the reason why we escaped is because we really fed up with our English owners forcing us to engage in this sort of devilish satanic religion of theirs, which they call Christianity, but it's not. It's not the true faith at all. We want to follow the true faith. We want to be loyal subjects of the Pope. So this is kind of a sophisticated argument that the Spaniards in America completely fall for. And they write letters to Mexico City saying, these guys are they're true believers. They're good Catholics. And it's true what they're saying about the English who worship the devil. Let's let them be free and live here. Okay, there's lots more that I could say about the Belize Yucatan connection, but I'm